on in. It's our community, and I'm Mary Davidson, and I'm so glad you're here. We have as our guest today Roger Shimomura, and Roger is a distinguished professor of art emeritus at the University of Kansas. He is first and foremost an artist, a lovely gentleman, and our neighbor. Very well known, and I am just really honored to have you, Roger. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It is said of you, I always have to remind you what has been said of you, that Roger Shimomura has gained an international reputation with art that is beautiful in a deceptive sort of way. With a look influenced by American comic books and Japanese woodblock prints, his works lure you in with gumball colors, crisp lines, flat and often recognized imagery of Americana and traditional Japan. Then they slap you when you realize that you're looking at blunt interpretations of racism, documentations of life inside Japanese internment camps, subtle political statements about identity. Is that you?
I'm afraid so.
So you confess that it is you?
I will own up to that.
It isn't everybody that is committed to the point that you are to abolish as much as you can of bigotry and racism and discrimination. And I think much of it came from your childhood. At 2, in February of 1942, you were taken to Camp Minidoka in Idaho. Why? Lots of people that are watching out there have no idea why a lovely man like you at 2 years old would be taken to an internment camp.
Well, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, suddenly America forgot that there was a difference between the Japanese nationals that made that attack and the citizens, American citizens of Japanese descent. And all of a sudden, regardless of whether you were a citizen or not, became irrelevant. And 95% of the Japanese Americans living in this country became suspect, and without trial or due cause
or explanation
were placed in concentration camps for a period of up to 4 years.
You were there you were there that long, were you not?
Well, our family, my mother and I, were in for 2 years. It varied among other family members, but after 2 years we were allowed to go out, and we went up to Chicago, and I entered kindergarten there. And then after 1 year, my grandparents came out, and we all were allowed to go back to the so-called security zone, which was Seattle for us.
Well, and I think it's appropriate here to mention the fact that you are a third-generation American.
That's correct.
So I think the absolute unfairness and brutality, if you will, of wrenching people out of their lives, their livelihood, their homes, everything that they knew, did indeed happen, and it happened in this country. And it has affected your life and your creative product for all of your life, really.
Well, you know, amazingly, a large part of the population in this country didn't even know about it, didn't even realize that this was going on the West Coast. And I started to become aware of that when I entered graduate school, actually in the 1960s. And I brought the subject up at a class that we were having, a discussion on political issues and all that. And this was in Syracuse, New York. And no one believed me. And since most of the students were from the East Coast, it of course told me that
the communication is not the best.
Right. Well, they weren't being taught this in their history books. And were enough for the fact that there was another couple there from Portland, Oregon, you know, who corroborated my story. I don't think I could have convinced anyone there that this actually happened. And, you know, of course, since then, you know, and since I've spent 40 years traveling around the country and lecturing about my work, a lot of which has to do with the internment, that ignorance still continues, amazingly so.
I'm certain it never ceases to surprise you that the ignorance continues.
Well, I remember when I was in high school, in an American history class, there was one sentence in the American history book that referred to the internment, and it said something like, during the war, Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps. No justification, no other
There was
comment.
a period there.
That was it.
That was it. Sad? I know that the Nerman Gallery has in its permanent collection one of your works, and it shows American Infamy is the title, and I think that's exactly right. It's a very large work and can be seen. It's on permanent display upstairs, and it can be seen and reminding us of what happened. Very, very bad. However, the interesting part of this whole thing is that your grandmother kept a diary.
She actually kept a diary for her entire life in this country. A lot of people think that it was just for the 3 years that she was interned, but she actually started the diary in 1912, just prior to getting on the ship that was taking her to America. And she came as a photo bride, along with 60 other women, all of whom only had photographs of their future husbands.
They went back to the old country for a wife. Is that, yeah?
Essentially.
Your father didn't know her, did he?
No,
no,
not at all. In fact, the reason it happened was because my grandfather's brother worked in the same silk factory as my grandmother. And he said, listen, I have, my brother's single and he's living in America. How would you like to join him? And so when all of the formalities had been completed and it was agreed upon by both sides, she got on this ship and started to take notes about, it was really about exchanging gifts with people she was saying goodbye to, saying that she would be back probably in 10 years, probably a wealthy woman, and then got on the ship. But she continued writing, and it became a formal diary at that point for 56 years.
Have you ever put it in book form have you ever edited for publication?
No, 56 years. It's written in Japanese.
Oh, it's written in Japanese.
Yeah, and it's quite,
isn't that
it's quite a process.
Well, your 2-year-old brush with racism did not stop there. And you talk about an incident when you were 6 or 7 and your father drove the family from Seattle, where you lived, to a resort where you were to take a vacation, and they said, we don't want any Japanese here.
Right. That was in Cannon Beach, Oregon. That was probably maybe a year after we got back out of the camps and resettled in Seattle, because I remember my dad had just bought a new 1946 Chevrolet, and he wanted to take it on a road trip. And since he felt that the family should get away on a vacation every year, he was a pharmacist, he decided on Cannon Beach, Oregon. And I remember the 3 of us driving down. My sister, I had a sister that was born in camp that passed away right after camp. And then I had another sister that was born. I think my mom was probably carrying her when we left for Cannon Beach. But I remember getting there, parking the car in front of the motel, and I remember my dad getting out and going into the office, and then coming out and motioning to my mom to get out of the car. And the 2 of them were having this conversation, and I still remember so vividly sitting in the back of that car watching this conversation, not knowing what was wrong, because
But you knew something was wrong.
I knew something was wrong. And then my dad went back in again, and then he came back out and he told my mother that they were going to give us a cabin. And we drove down this pathway into the forest, and there were cabins on both sides. And finally, there was one at the end there that was completely covered with weeds and vines and hadn't been used, it looked like, in years, and that was our cabin.
But they cleaned it up?
Yeah. First thing we did was go to the grocery store, and my mom got all these cleaning supplies, bought mops, brooms, everything else. And it seemed to me, although I'm sure it wasn't that way, but it seemed to me we spent the entire 4 days or 5 days cleaning the place, and that included pulling weeds and everything else, and then we left. And but when we got back to Seattle, my dad, about a week or two later, proudly showed a letter to my mother from the owner of that resort, saying that he had appreciated what we had done and would not disallow Asian people from staying there in the future.
Well, maybe it turned out for good.
Yeah, and I think it really points out the difference, too, in the way that things were handled back then in the 40s and how they might be handled today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it was not to be over. In 1972, you had another incident where you were at an auction, and a farmer talked about Gishi girls, and it led, I would imagine, to some of the lithographs for which you have become so famous.
Well, actually, it led to everything that I had done. It was a conversation that happened many times since I had been in Lawrence with many people, and it had to do, in this case, with why I spoke the language so well and where was I from. And when I said Seattle, he said, "That's not what I mean. Where are your parents from?" And my parents were both born in the Pacific Northwest as well. And you know, when we finally got down to the fact that you know, my grandparents were the immigrants, he started asking questions as to what I did for a living, you know, in Lawrence. In other words, he made me feel like, you know, a real foreigner. But as I said, this is something that happened so many times since I had been in Lawrence, because in 1969, when I got here, you could virtually count the number of Asian people on one hand.
Well, and
most of them were foreigners, not Americans. But the point was that, you know, I have had such a long lineage in this country, and my background and upbringing and education and everything else is no different than, or was no different than anybody else's, you know, regardless of race.
Well, and you have done a picture, a lithograph of yourself, and you have a lot of yourself in a lot of your art that we're going to look at it against a background of it looks like people from Japanese woodblocks, and here you are. Would you talk about that a little bit? Well,
that particular painting is called American versus Japanese, and relates directly to that conversation. Of, you know, it's sort of a cry out that I'm not Japanese, you know, I'm an American first. That's of Japanese ancestry, you know. So that's been a theme, recurring theme, I think, in a lot of the work that I've done over the years.
I think so too, and I think now that we have set the stage and talked about who you are and how we find you and the work that you have created, this huge body of work over all these years, you have been influenced by some very fine artists as well, and Andy Warhol was one of those. When did you first see the Andy Warhol things?
I don't remember when I first saw Andy Warhol, his work, but it's something that I think happened when the entire nation learned about pop art. And I became really fascinated with it. I was in school at the University of Washington in Seattle at the time, and this was an East Coast phenomenon, and was part of the reason I decided to drop out of graduate school at Washington and transfer and go back east, and then became like just totally, completely immersed in popular culture, and it became a real influence upon my work, probably too much so.
Your art depicts truth. Does the truth matter?
Of course it matters. I mean, without that, I don't. I think in some ways every artist tries to pursue that, you know, and the truth being a very personal issue as well.
Exactly, and the pursuit of that truth does vary with the individual and that individual's background and thinking and meaning. You had a student that said something very, very lovely about you. She said, her name was Marvel Mering, and she said, "Roger's ghost is in my studio every time I work, coaxing me to be honest, to find my core, and to do the work that is mine." I think that's
very nice.
I think that's wonderful.
Where did you find that?
When I looked up information on you, she was quoted, and I thought, you know, that's probably the nicest thing anyone could say about their teacher, their mentor, their person that they...
I'll have to thank her for that.
I think that's lovely. So we need to take a look at your work now. Roger DeSmet, the director of exhibitions at the Richmond Center for the Visual Arts, says of you, "Roger uses humor to get us to look. And you find that you're laughing before you really know what you're looking at." And I think your work is emotional, but it's in some ways a little bitter and very aware. Am I off base?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think the humor is a necessary strategy. I was trying to make the point to a student a few weeks ago, and I was saying, you know, when people laugh, they open their mouth, and that's the moment that you can start shoving things in there, you know. Yeah. Without that, dealing with the kind of subject matter that I do, the danger is to become preachy, and no one wants that, and everybody knows what the issues are. And so it takes some kind of strategy to get the audience to just wait a second, to look at the work longer than they usually do, which is usually a nanosecond. And if you could do that, you've accomplished something. And so my strategy is humor. And this usually has a kind of disarming effect. They laugh and they relax, and then they're willing to sort of stick around for a little bit longer.
To see what you have to say.
Yeah, because, you know, people don't look at art that long. You know, people will say all kinds of things about how much they love your work and how much they, you know, they're interested in a particular painting and all that. And the chances are they have never spent more than 15 seconds looking at a painting.
Well, we've all seen people that go into a gallery, they stand in the middle of the floor, they do a 360-degree turn, and they walk out the door because they've seen it.
And that, you know, means that they've seen the show.
That's right.
Yeah.
You are, it is said, again, a very orderly and efficient person. And I know that you keep binders of different subjects. You have Jap hunting licenses, you have patriotics, you have racist memorabilia. Is that where you get your ideas?
For one series of work, I would say that comes from being a collector.
Yes.
And I've been a collector all my life.
Well, some of us have that disease.
Yeah, yeah. And I just recently donated that whole collection to the Wing Luke Asian Museum in Seattle.
That's wonderful.
And it was over 2,000 objects. And also did a show of the paintings that were influenced by that collection.
But I think the bottom line of your art is culture, discrimination, and stereotyping. and the constant battle that many of us wage against that and the unfairness of the whole thing. I own, I have to say, one of your, it's the only one I can afford, but I own this one, and I love her. And she says, what do you see when you look at me? What should I see when I look at her? I see a little girl with a tag on her being stereotyped.
Right. There's actually an important issue besides the interment and the identification tag.
Mm-hmm.
The name of the suite of 6 lithographs is called Mistaken Identities.
I know. I had to choose one.
Yeah. But the reason for that title, Mistaken Identities, is that what happened in 1941 after Pearl Harbor was that the government was incapable of distinguishing between Japanese and Japanese Americans. And so what this suite of prints is kind of a play on that. And if you'll notice, all of the people in the prints are dressed like Japanese.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is
they are not. They're Americans.
Not, absolutely. And so you would never see this scene in reality. They would be dressed just like we are right now.
And so it is very appropriate to say, what do you see when you look at me?
Yes.
I love her. You've had other artists influence your art, not all of them recent and contemporary. And I know that much of your art has been influenced by the art of the floating world, ukiyo-e. And I think I love that art. And one of them was an artist by the name of Utamaro. And he did, some of them were advertising posters, actually, weren't they? That designed for the theater, the geisha, the courtesans, and the tea houses, and that kind of thing. But I just think she's beautiful. And the other one was Shiraku. And he did essentially the same, but you have been influenced by those two, and you can see that influence come through in the little girl. And I think the other two that we need to mention, because they do such beautiful things, so I'm taking an opportunity to show their works because I think they're beautiful. Hokusai, and they did landscaping, and their influence has spread all over the world. I mean, this waterfall is, I think it's kind of, it makes you catch your breath. It's just beautiful, but the colors are bright, and the statement is strong, and I think they're just beautiful. The other one is Hiroshige, and that duck he looks like he's floating on air. Beautiful. So your art is a blend then of pop art and ukiyo-e.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. However, the influence of Japanese woodblock prints on my work is far more superficial than people think it is. Mm-hmm. It's really the look of it. People assume that I know a lot about them, but I'm certainly not a scholar about any of those artists that you mentioned. And I know that when Asianists will look at some of my older work that had that very strong sort of woodblock appearance, they'd become confused because I would mix 3 centuries of art together on one picture plane, you know.
But that's wonderful. It's a smorgasbord. You've taken from them what was it?
It was a serious attempt not to learn anything about it, so that I could just sort of scrape the appearance, you know, off of the surface of the print and use it for my purposes. What was important was that they look Japanese. And what can look more Japanese than a woodblock print?
That's right. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. You did some other things along the line of bigotry and discrimination and that kind of thing. I'd like to. You did a picture of 2 women. One was clearly Caucasian, the other Asian. The Caucasian woman is standing in front of the barbed wire, the Asian. Would you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, it's a series of paintings that I did called Minidoka on My Mind. And I did several paintings. To me, the essence of the internment can be reduced down to a barbed wire fence and what's inside and what's outside. In the case of this painting, which is called Classmates, I think it's clear they're both dressed very similarly, and both are holding apples, presumably for the teacher. However, their world is separated by this barbed wire. They're no longer classmates. And I've done probably 10 paintings based on that theme.
You also did one with Disney characters in the back, and an image in the front that has black face. Is that African American? Is that Japanese? What were you saying there?
It's sort of a kind of a combination. It was this idea of blackface, and similar things being done to other nationalities as well. For example, I had a whole collection of masks that depicted Asian people. But this particular painting was called Mr. Wong's Theater Company. Oh. And all of the various depictions of Disney and the way Disney depicted people of color is what this painting was supposed to be about.
And you did another one. We have to go back to the geishas again, because you did another one, and that I want to talk about, and it is a picture of a geisha, and then in the background there is an image that is kind of a scary-looking fellow, and
yeah, this was actually the painting that started it all. This goes back to 1970 or 71 or so in a painting called Oriental Masterpiece. And this was done in direct response to that conversation I had with the farmer at the auction. This was a painting that changed everything for me. And so I wanted to do a painting that looked Japanese. I wanted to do a painting like the kind of painting I thought that this farmer would expect that I would make. Mm-hmm. And so when I did this, the amazing thing was that it felt so exotic to me. It felt foreign. I felt like I had really done something completely out of my element. But the people that saw the painting, I remember one of the most commonly repeated comment was that it's good to see you do paintings that you look like.
Well, speaking of paintings that you look like, you often put yourself in your art. And why do you do that?
I do that because it's, my art has always been my personal investment in my life. And so what better person to represent that stereotype than myself? And so I use myself as the prototype American that looks Japanese, next to
the soldier.
In this case, the soldier. That is the stereotype, World War II stereotype, except the invention of white America. This is what we look like to white America.
And you did another one that you put yourself in a lot of American kinds of images, and you keep saying the same thing. Are we changing?
Are we talking about this painting?
Yeah. But you're talking about the same thing. You're talking about discrimination. You're talking about.
In a way, right? But it's a different way of trying to get at it. In the case of putting myself in the context of all of these Disney characters, what I'm saying is that Disney is something that we all commonly grew up with and believed in as being goodness, the American way, and so on. But, quote unquote, Disney did different things for different people. And there was a lot of disappointment in my case in these figures. This world that I believed in has treated me so wrong in so many ways.
Do you think we're doing better?
Well, that's, I think, yet to be proven. I mean, I see the potential for a lot of the things that happened to us happening again to people of Middle Eastern extraction, and whoever the, you know, enemy du jour is. Very similar kinds of threats seem to emerge from that. 9/11 certainly brought the worst out in the government, and they talked about internment again. You know, government has very short history, memory.
Well, we as people have a short memory too, I think, often. And the real truth is, Roger, we are all immigrants, all of us.
That's right.
And lest we forget that, we are in trouble.
That's right.
We cannot forget that. Where are you going from here? What are you going to do, art-wise?
Well, there are quite a few things. Right now I have a show in New York City that's going to go to the Smithsonian.
That's where your papers are going, is it not your...
Yeah,
yes.
personal papers, right. I have a show of all of the internment camp paintings that are going to be shown at the Lawrence Art Center February 11th. And outside of a couple of shows at the Spencer Art Museum, I really haven't shown in Lawrence in the last 30 years, 35 years or so. So they're also printing up a really beautiful catalog of the exhibition, which will not only be of about 35 paintings, but it'll also be of my collection of internment camp memorabilia that I've collected.
All kinds are just Japanese for the internment camp. Japanese internment camp memorabilia.
Things that were made in the camps.
Oh, I see.
And things that were about the camps. Published things, objects, art objects, all of those things.
That will be very, very
And
interesting.
all of those are going to be donated to the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian.
May they all serve as a reminder that unless we realize the history, we are doomed to repeat it again. So
That's correct.
Very famous saying, and I think it's so true, and often we forget how soon we forget. And so you told me that you're doing, that basically you're a painter rather than a lithographer. So you're doing more painting?
I'm doing all painting, as I have, except for a short period of time of maybe 20 years or so. I did a lot of theater work, and during those 20 years I was probably a 50-50 a theater artist and a painter. But I've never called myself a printmaker, but it's something that I've always done as an aside to painting.
Well, I think that multifaceted is always important and good. But although you have done different mediums, you have always stuck to the same shibboleth, which is we must not be discriminatory, or we must not ostracize people because they are different.
That's been the driving force, I think, behind everything I've done since I've been in Kansas, at least.
Well, I would have to say that it has been such a great pleasure to have you. And Roger Shimomura, Professor Emeritus at the University of Kansas, recipient of the Chancellor's Club Teaching Award for Sustained Excellence in Teaching and Dedication to the Students. Your wife says that you have a soft and nostalgic, sentimental and romantic side that nobody sees. That's what she said about you.
And she could barely see it.
Well, she was looking very closely. And some of your closest friends say that you're hard to get to know, that you're something of an enigma, yet you are a magnet. And if there's anything Roger is, they say, he's somebody that people tend to gravitate toward, even if they're not attracted, they're attracted. Isn't that wonderful? I think that's wonderful. But you have always believed that the world is far too small to allow discrimination, bigotry, or intolerance. And so is the man, the artist, and the teacher, Roger Shimomura. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an honor. And thank you, It's always just wonderful to have you visit us as we look at these wonderful people and talk with them that live in our community. See you soon again.